You do not work in the dark, you live in it. The cage drops and the last square of daylight shrinks to a coin, then to nothing, and the air changes around you, thick with coal dust and wet stone, and the breath of men and ponies who will not see the sun today. Your candle is a single weak star in a mile of black. The roof above you is held up by timber props you are told to trust and learn not to. You are not going down to dig coal. You are going down to find out how many ways the earth has to keep you. You did not choose this. No one down here chose this. You were born to a pit village where the only question was which shaft would take you. And at an age when other children were learning their letters, you were learning to sit alone in the dark and not cry where the men could hear. The pit owns a family the way the sea owns a fishing town. It takes the father, then the son after that, and it calls this an honest trade. If you want to keep seeing history from the bottom of the shaft, instead of the top of the page, subscribe and stay down here in the dark where it was actually lived. The day starts before the day. A man comes down the road tapping the windows with a long pole to wake the shift while the sky is still black, and you rise into a cold house and eat what there is, which is little, and take your snap tin and your water bottle, and the snap is bread and dripping if it is a good week, and bread and nothing if it is not. You walk to the pit head in the dark with men who do not talk much because there is nothing to say that the day will not say for them. The wheel turns above the shaft. The cage waits. Somewhere a woman watches a husband go and does the small sum every pit wife learns to do without meaning to. The one that asks whether this is the morning the cage does not bring him back. The cage is not a lift. It is an iron basket on a rope, and the rope is the only thing between you and the bottom of a shaft that drops further than the tallest thing you have ever seen stood on its end. It falls fast enough to lift the stomach, faster on the days the engine man is tired or careless, and now and then a rope frays or a chain gives, and a cage full of men becomes a sound and then a silence, and the village learns it from the bell. You step in because the alternative is to not eat. Hunger is the only thing down here stronger than fear. At the bottom, the world is low. The roadways are not made for a man to stand, and the seams are worse, some of them no taller than a dog, and you work bent or kneeling or flat on your side for the length of a shift that has no clock in it. The heat rises as you go deeper, wet and close, and the dust hangs in the still air and finds your lungs and stays there. You breathe black, you spit black. By the end of a life, you will cough up the pit itself. At the face, the hewer works the coal itself, and the face is the hottest, lowest, most dangerous place in the whole pit. And it is where the money is, so it is where the men are. You lie on your side in water that never drains, in a heat that has men working stripped to the waist or stripped to nothing at all, and you swing a pick at a black wall, a hand's breadth from your eyes. By the light of a flame you must not let near the gas. The coal does not come easily. You undercut the seam, you wedge it, you bring it down in your lap, and the dust of it fills the air you are breathing so that the candle wears a halo and your own hand fades at arm's length. The rats are down here with you, and you are almost glad of them because the rats know things. They came down in the hay for the ponies, and they bred in the dark, and they share your snap if you let them, and an old collier will tell you to watch them, because when the rats run all one way out of a district, you run with them, for they feel the roof and the gas before a man can. The pit teaches you to read it through everything. The rats, the flame, the taste of the air, the small complaints of the timber, and the men who do not learn to read it do not get old. The shaft bottom is not the workplace. It is only the door to it. From there the seam might run a mile, 2 miles, out under the fields and under the sea itself, and you walk or crawl every yard of that distance bent double in roadways that drip and narrow, before you have cut a single piece of coal, and none of that journey is paid. The day is counted from the face, not from the cage, so the long aching travel in and the long travel out come out of your own life, not the master's purse. By the time you reach the place where the work begins, you have already spent an hour folded over in the dark, and the work has not started. and the air is already worse than it was at the shaft. Your light is a flame, and the flame is your whole world, and also one of the things most likely to kill you. A bare candle in a gassy seam is a wager against the air, and the air does not always tell you it is turned. Later, they give some of you a safety lamp, a flame caged in fine wire so it cannot reach the gas outside it. And that lamp saves lives, and also sends more men deeper into workings that should never have been opened, because now they think the danger is solved. A tool that makes a deadly place survivable is also a tool that fills the deadly place with more men. The tools are simple, and they are cruel. A pick to hack the coal from the face, swung from a position no body was built to hold, hour after hour, until the shoulder is a knot of fire. A shovel to load it. The corves, the carts of coal, dragged through the low roadways on iron rails, and somebody has to drag them, and that somebody is often a child or a woman with a chain around the waist, and the chain run between the legs and hooked to the cart, crawling on hands and knees through water and muck with the weight behind them. They called it hurrying. There is no word for it that sounds like what it was. For a long time it was women and girls, in that harness as much as boys, hauling the coal on all fours through water and filth, half-clothed in the heat, working the same hours as any man and paid a fraction of his wage. When gentlemen from the city finally went down to look and wrote it all into a report, the country was shocked. Not so much that children were dying in the dark, but that women were down there at all, undressed by the heat, and the law that followed pulled the women and the youngest children out of the pits, which was a mercy, and also took the only wages some families had. The pit gives you a cruelty and then takes it away and leaves you poorer for the loss of it. That is the shape of every kindness that ever reached a mining village. And the smallest children do the job that is somehow worse for doing nothing at all. They are the trappers. A trapper sits alone in the dark beside a wooden ventilation door for 12 hours, longer, and their single task is to open the door when a cart comes and shut it after, because the doors keep the air moving, and the air moving is the only thing keeping the gas from gathering. A child of 6 or 7, alone, in a darkness so complete that the eyes invent their own lights, listening for the rumble of a cart and the only human voices they will hear all day. They are not allowed a candle. Candles cost money. So the youngest workers in the pit spend their childhood in a black that has no bottom, and they learn the lesson the whole place teaches. You are cheaper than light. Before any of the day shift goes to the face, one man goes ahead into the dark to meet the gas on purpose. The fireman, the deputy, crawls into the workings with a covered light and tests the air. And in the older pits, the worst of this job belonged to a man, wrapped in wet sacking, who crawled flat with a candle on a long pole held up to the roof, deliberately firing the pockets of gas in small bursts, so they could not grow into the big one. He was burned for a living so the others could work. When the pits found better ways, the job faded. But for years, a mine was made survivable each morning by sending one man to be singed by the very thing that could kill them all. And he did it because it paid a little more, and a little more was everything. The ponies live down here too, and many of them never come up again. They are lowered as foals and stabled in the dark, and grow old hauling coal through tunnels they learn by feel, and a good number go blind. And the men grow fond of them in the way you grow fond of anything that suffers beside you. When a roof comes down, it takes the ponies the same as the men, and the owners grieve the ponies more, because a pony costs money to replace, and a boy does not. Now the ways the pit kills you, and they do not wait politely in a line. The first and the one the old men fear most is the firedamp. It is gas, methane, seeping invisible from the coal, and it has no smell that a tired man will notice, and it gathers in the high pockets of the roof and along the old workings, and it wants one thing only, a flame. When it finds one, the whole mine becomes a single breath of fire that races down every roadway at once, and men a mile from the spark are killed by the wind of it before the heat arrives. Whole shifts have gone in a heartbeat this way. 100 men, 200. in the time it takes to say it. If you think the dark is the cruelty, you have not met the thing that comes after the fire. Wait until you learn what the survivors breathe. Stay where you are. The worst of the pit is not the part that burns, because the explosion is not even the most reliable killer. That is the afterdamp, the gas left behind once the fire has eaten the good air, a still poison that pools in the roadways and waits. Men who lived through the blast crawl toward the shaft and into it, and simply stop. Not burned, not crushed, only quietly emptied of the air they need. And the rescue parties who come down too soon to find them lie down beside them. The pit does not need to explode to suffocate you. There is black damp too, the heavy choking air that gathers where the candle dims and goes out. And a wise man watches his flame the way a sailor watches the sky, because when the light starts to die, the man is not far behind it. And the roof, always the roof. The whole weight of the world sits on those timber props and on pillars of coal left standing to hold it. And the pit is a constant, slow argument between the men taking coal out and the earth wanting to close the space they made. A fall can be a single stone that picks off one man in the dark, or it can be a run that buries a roadway and everyone in it. And the sound of it, that first crack and shift, is the sound every collier listens for under every other sound, all day, for the whole of his working life. The water is patient, and then it is not. The deeper workings push under rivers and old flooded pits, and a careless cut into the wrong wall lets in a flood that fills the low roadways faster than a man can crawl uphill out of them. And the dark fills with cold rising water, and the screaming stops one voice at a time. And there is the simple machinery of the place, the runaway cart that comes out of the black with nothing to warn you, the cage that drops a man down the shaft, the rope, the cable, the winding gear, every one of them a way to die that does not even have the decency to be rare. And when the worst happens, it is other colliers who go down to it. There is no one else who knows the workings, so the rescue is always made of men from the same village, going back into the gas and the fallen roof to bring out their own, knowing the afterdamp may take them as it took the men they are reaching for. They go anyway, because the man under the fall is a brother or a neighbor or a son, and because tomorrow it might be them. And the only insurance a pit village has against the dark is the certainty that the others will come for you. It is the truest thing in the whole brutal place, and it costs more lives every year, and they never stop doing it. If a single shift of this sounds unbearable, leave a like, and think of the children who did it in the dark with no candle. Say none of it takes you today. Say you ride the cage back up into a sky that hurts your eyes after the black, and you walk home coated in the pit. The pit is still killing you, only slower now. The dust you breathed is already in your lungs, and it does not leave, and over the years it hardens them, and the cough comes, the black spit, the breath that gets shorter season by season until a man who survived every fall and every blast dies in his own bed gasping for an air the pit took from him decades before. They have names for it now. The men who had it only knew that the work followed them home and finished the job in the end. The dark gets into the eyes as surely as the dust gets into the chest. A man who spends his life straining to see by a flame the size of a thumbnail loses the sight he is straining with, and there is a trembling of the eyes that comes to old colliers, a flickering they cannot stop, the body's memory of decades spent hunting for light that was never enough. Some go half blind in the open air, dazzled by a daylight their eyes have forgotten how to hold. The pit takes the lungs slowly, and the back slowly, and the eyes slowly, and it takes them all from the same man at the same time, so that the end of a mining life is a body failing on every side at once. The body wears the trade like a brand, knees ruined from a life on them, a back bent to the shape of a low seam and never straight again, hands you cannot fully open, scars where the coal and the iron and the roof took their pieces. A collier at 40 has the body of a much older man, and a collier at 60 is a rare thing, and the few who reach it sit by the fire they spent their lives feeding and cannot get warm. Above all of it sits the owner, and here is the abysmo the whole age was built on. The coal you tear out of the dark with your ruined hands is the fire under every furnace and every grand house, and every engine of the empire. And the money it makes flows up the shaft and out of the village, and into men who have never been below ground and never will. They warm themselves at your seam, they light their drawing rooms with your lungs, and they pay you, when they pay you, in tokens good only at the company shop, where the prices are set by the same men who own the pit, so that the wage goes back to the master before it is cold in your hand. You do not work for money, you work for the right to keep working. The village is the company, the house is the company, the shop is the company, the chapel is often the company. A man born in a pit village is born already in debt to the people who own the ground under it. And the debt is the kind that a single life cannot pay, only passed down, so that a father hands his son not a trade but a sentence, and tells himself it is the only honest thing he has to give. There is no door out of this. You cannot simply leave, because to leave is to lose the company house with it. And the next pit is owned by men cut from the same cloth. And you carry your debt to the shop with you like a chain longer than the one around the hurrier's waist. In some places, the men are bound by a yearly contract that ties them to the one master for the whole of it. And breaking it is a matter for the magistrate, who is often the master's friend or the master himself. You are free in the way a wheel is free. You may turn, but only on the axle they have set, and only as far as the rim they have built. If you had been born to that pit village, tell me what takes you first, the gas or the dust or the dark? Say it below. And the dying is counted the way the coal is counted, by the ton, by the year, a number in a report that no one in the warm houses reads. A bad year takes a few hundred in the disasters, the explosions that make the newspapers for a week, and it takes more than that, quietly, 1 and 2 at a time, in the falls and the floods and the runaway carts that never make the papers at all. When the roof takes a whole shift, the village fills with women at the pit head, waiting for a cage that brings up the dead in the order the rescuers can reach them. And the same women are back at the same gate within the week, sending the next of their men down, because the pit is still the only thing there is. And the day after a man is carried up, his place at the face is not empty. It is filled by a brother, by a neighbor, by the son who has been waiting his whole short life to be old enough. And the boy steps into the cage, and the cage drops, and the daylight shrinks to a coin, then to nothing, exactly as it did for his father, and the trade swallows him exactly as it swallowed every man before, and calls it honest. The coal you died for warmed an empire. It ran the mills and lit the cities and drove the ships and built the fortunes that history remembers by name. And not one of those names ever sat in the dark beside a ventilation door at the age of 6, or felt a roof shift overhead, or breathed the black that would one day be the only thing left in the chest. You do not work in the dark, you live in it, and you die a little in it every shift, and the light of the whole bright century above your head was made entirely of the dark that was eating you. They called it progress. From where you knelt, on your side, in a seam no taller than a dog, with the gas gathering quietly in the roof. It had no name at all. It was only the work, and the work was the world, and the world was a mile of black with a single weak star burning down to nothing in your hand. And in the cold dark before the next dawn, the wheel would turn, and the cage would drop, and it would begin again. And if some part of you wants to go down into another of history's buried horrors, the kind the warm, bright world was built to forget, there is more of it waiting here. Subscribe, and choose the next life that was never meant to be survived.